This lesson covers creating a tiered storage space. In this lab environment, I have 4 spare disks available, 2 SSD drives, and 2 regular hard disk drives. And I'm going to use these to create a new storage pool, and within that storage pool, a storage space or virtual disk. I do this through Server Manager, and I go to my File and Storage Services, Storage Pools. Currently, all 4 of those disks, and you can see their type is actually shown as SSD or HDD, hard disk drive, and solid state drive, in the primordial pool, which means it's currently not assigned to any storage space. From the Tasks menu, I select New Storage Pool. I click Next and I give it a name, so this can be called my Test Storage Pool. I then select the physical drives I wish to be placed into it, so I'll select all of them. And by default, the allocation is automatic, though I could also specify specific disks to be hot spare drives or manually assigned. I see the confirmation and I click Create. This has now created a storage pool. So the primordial has gone because all drives are now allocated to this new storage pool. I will then check the box to create a virtual disk. I could also cancel this and perform this manually through the virtual disks and selecting new virtual disk. So I'll select the storage space, and then from my task, select new virtual disk, which is the same wizard. I select my storage pool and then give a name for this virtual disk or storage space. So I'll call this Test Virtual Disk. And I can also give a description. Notice I have this checkbox for create storage tiers on this virtual disk. If I don't use storage tiering, I can select a storage layout of simple, mirror, or parity because I have 4 disks in total, so I have enough to do parity. Also, I can do thin or fixed provisioning. If I go back and select create storage tiers, well, now I have 2 disks in each tier. This means I cannot do parity. Parity requires 3 disks. I can select mirror. And for provisioning, I can only select fixed. You cannot do thin provisioning if you do a tiered storage space. I then select the size from each tier. So for my SSD tier, I'm going to select 50 gigabytes. For my hard disk drive tier, I'll select 200 gigabytes. This is usable space. Remember, this is mirrored. So this is 50 gigabytes from each of my SSDs and 200 gigabytes from each of my hard disk drives. You'll also notice it will use additional space to create a write-back cache on the SSD disks. This does not come out of the 50 gigabytes I've specified, rather it will use additional space on those SSD drives. By default, this is 1 gigabyte, but it can be changed if using PowerShell. I'll click Next, it's confirming the options, and I hit Create. This is now going ahead and actually creating that virtual disk. I can now opt to actually create a volume. This is just a standard volume in Windows I can format with NTFS, etc. So I'll just not select that and hit Close. There you can see my test virtual disk, 250 gigabytes in total, and I can see the percent allocated in here. So this is creating this through Server Manager. Again, I could now go into this and create the volume. The other option is to actually use PowerShell. So what I have here is all the various PowerShell commands that I can use. Now right now, if I do get virtual disk, this will show me that virtual disk I just created through the graphical interface. And if I format this as a list, I can see more detail. I can see all the different elements I selected, it's read-write. I can see the allocated size, interleave, how the disk is actually organized, 2 data copies because it's a mirror. Also, I'll see the write cache size. That's that default of 1 gigabyte. Now I could go ahead and create the whole thing through PowerShell. For example, these are all the different commands. The first command says get a list of all the disks that could be pulled. I then store those in a variable and then I create a new storage pool using those disks and I give it a name and a friendly name, same as what I did using the graphical interface. Next, I create two tiers, an SSD tier containing the solid state drives and a hard disk drive tier using the hard disk drive disks. I create a new virtual disk. I specify the storage pool I wish to use. I specify the tiers that I wish to use and the sizes from each tier. I also select the resiliency type. And notice here I could specify an alternate write cache size. I've selected the default of 1 GB, but I could change this using PowerShell that I cannot change when using the graphical interface. The next set of commands simply initialize and format the disk. I then copy an item to that new drive I created. Now this is something I can only do with PowerShell. This next command, set file storage tier, actually pins this specific file, my m:important test.jpg, into the SSD tier of that virtual disk I created. The tiering does not actually happen in real time. What happens is nightly at 1 AM by default, an optimization is run, kind of like a disk defrag. And this is actually done via the -tier optimize switch. So this effectively forces it to perform a tier optimization. It looks at which files have been pinned to different tiers and also which blocks have been used the most. So if you ever manually pin files to a tier, for example using set file storage tier, if you wish it to actually move to the desired tier straight away, you need to run optimize volume, the drive, with -tier optimize. This will force it to do that move. Again, there is a default task that runs at 1 AM, which you can see using this get scheduled task for my storage tiers management, or you could view it in the scheduled task application. So this is doing everything I did through Server Manager or using PowerShell.